Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. The Web Platform Podcast is a proud O'Reilly media partner. As such, one of the benefits we provide our listeners, that's you, are special discounts such as 50% off of ebooks and 40% off of printed materials. So this includes but is not limited to books on web technologies, as well as other technologies you may be using. So your discount code is all caps PCBW. That's PCBW, all in caps. So head over to O'Reilly.com, that's OREILLY.com, right now to get all your favorite tech books at much lower prices. This is episode 67 of the Web Platform Podcast. Today in our panel is Chetan Karande, or Chetan.
Yeah, Chetan.
I've known you for like so many years and I keep messing up your name.
That's normal. That's correct, actually. It was correct.
I'm just a jerk sometimes. And myself, Eric Isaacson. And we have a guest today, Peter Cooper. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Wow. Do I get 5, 10, 15 minutes for this?
You got your 15 minutes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, just to quickly summarize probably why I'm here. I'm here because I'm the chair of the Fluent conference that O'Reilly runs. It's a web developer kind of / JavaScript developer conference, and I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. But I'm also a chair of the OSCon conference that O'Reilly runs. And I'm also perhaps best known for running newsletters, email newsletters like JavaScript Weekly and Ruby Weekly, and there's a whole ton of other ones, which, you know, we sort of collectively have about, how many is it, about now 270, 280,000 subscribers on those. So quite a few people. And I know other people might know me from other places, like I used to do a podcast called The JavaScript Show, which I know you used to do. Yeah, you've mentioned we should bring it back, but... Yeah, so there's probably quite a few places people will have heard of me from. So I just do a little bit of everything, and I kind of have my finger in lots of pies, really, is the best way to describe me.
I think a lot of developers depend on a lot of the things that you publish. So you have your own business, right, the Cooper Press?
Yeah.
And you also work with O'Reilly. And you have your chair, right? Is it co-chair or of the Fluent Conf?
Yeah, so on the Fluent conference, it's O'Reilly likes to have... on every conference, at least one internal co-chair and one external co-chair. Some conferences have more, but Fluent has two. So there's me as the external, and then the internal co-chair is Simon St. Laurent, who's kind of well known in the O'Reilly space as well. So yeah, and then I think on OSCon, so I'm a co-chair, that's the external one, and then it's Rachel Rumiliotis. She's got a very long name that I've had to learn to pronounce a few times, but Rachel Romuliotis is my co-chair there. So and I'm always working with other people. It's definitely not me just picking everything.
Yeah, was Rachel the one who was on the changelog podcast?
I think so. Yes, I believe she was. I haven't listened to it, but I did hear something about that.
Yeah, it was a good episode.
Yeah,
we talked a lot about OSCon and Fluent. A little bit.
Yeah, I don't understand how she gets everything done, because she is, co-chair of numerous conferences within O'Reilly, and she also handles the websites, and it's just I couldn't do that much work.
Sure. 270-something thousand, you said, subscribers.
It's true.
Actually, when I met Peter in last year's Fluent conference, first question I asked him is how many hours you sleep, Peter? Because he get so many things done, so many newsletters, amazing information, all these conferences. So I wonder the same about you too, Peter.
Yeah, you're going to probably find out on this call I am extremely lazy, so I do sleep plenty enough. I just, I'm one of these people that's good at cutting corners and kind of get away with it for now.
Well, you're a speaker too, and you speak about, you used to code in Ruby, or you still do even. So it's a lot of stuff to do. Yeah,
so I still do program. I mean, I used to not do it full time as such, but it was a main part of my job. Now the only coding I do mostly, I have a few really, really old clients I still deal with. Just because I've got a long-term relationship with them. But really all development I do now is our own internal technology. So really I'm kind of leveraging programming as something to make my publishing business better rather than looking at it the other way around.
And we didn't really talk about FluentConf and what it is, and it was really inspirational for this podcast because some of the speakers I had seen on there, they were talking about some really innovative new type of technologies, and the web platform was the terminology used for Fluent, and I thought that was great. And since then, I've had that in my head as the web platform covers all of these technologies such as JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and everything that's wrapped around that. So, I mean, it was a big influence for the naming of this podcast in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about, what is Fluent? How did it start? And, why should developers really be watching this conference and going to it?
Just first off on the web platform thing, by the way, we actually stole the name as well. So we're in the same situation as you. It was kind of this effort that was being kicked off by Google, Mozilla. I think a whole bunch of different companies kind of came together to kind of give it this name. And so when I saw that, I thought that's a great name to kind of put the conference around. So it seems like they haven't really pushed that name since. So I think we're probably one of the more prolific users of the term, but it seems to be catching on very slowly. But we really like it for Fluent because it does describe what the conference is about. So just to give you the background to the conference, a quite famous JavaScript developer, and I don't want to name drop because they might not be interested in the story getting out and everything, but a well-known JavaScript developer went to O'Reilly with an idea for a conference to do with JavaScript, and they kind of had a bit of a falling out from what I heard. But O'Reilly still wanted to do a JavaScript conference. So they had an internal co-chair who was called Brady Forrest. He's now actually doing a TV show in the US of all things about like venture capital and stuff. So he's gone on to great things. Maybe I will too one day. But they had him, but they didn't have anyone external. So they saw that I was doing all the JavaScript newsletters and stuff, and they thought, well, there's kind of, he's going to know people that can speak and stuff like that. So they brought me in, and we put together the first conference. So it was really meant to be from the off a JavaScript conference. But as time went by, and we saw people submitting proposals for, things to do with HTML5 and CSS3 and just like WebSockets and stuff like that. I think we saw there was a bigger picture behind the whole thing. So that's where the idea of kind of leaning into this web platform idea came from, because we didn't really have a very good name for it. And when Google and these other companies came together and made the web platform idea, we were like, yeah, we can kind of use that brand as well. So it's pretty much what it's become. So it's been going 5 years now, I think. What was the first one? 2011. So 11, 12. Yeah, so we've had 5 so far. We've got another one next March. And what was it, 2012? I can't remember exactly, but we've had quite a few. But it really has become a platform conference. It's not just about JavaScript. Probably about a third of the talks are particularly about JavaScript, but the rest are all just covering like WebGL and WebSockets and just, even back-end stuff now we're moving into. Because we just want to provide this whole holistic conference that people that are doing front-end work, they're still going to be interested in some of the back-end stuff. So we want to provide a whole mixture of things. And that's where it's going. And I guess the only other piece of kind of news that I can share it's public, but it hasn't really spread yet. We haven't made a big song and dance about it, is that we're extending the conference to Europe next year. So we're not just going to be in San Francisco in March. We're going to be in, I think it's Amsterdam in...
That's the place to be these days.
Yeah, so OSCon's going to be in Amsterdam in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to be going out for that. So yeah, it seems like O'Reilly likes the venue there and everything, so they tend to stick around when that happens.
Yeah, the guys from the Changelog are going to be out there for OSCon.
I didn't know that. So that's cool. Yeah, no, because I know Adam, so I guess they're going to come and do some filming and stuff, because I've seen they're doing a lot of video lately.
At least I think they are. Don't hold me to that.
I'll hold you to that.
But Fluent, Chetan, I used to work with him in New York, and he spoke at the 2013 one. 2014 it was?
Yep.
All right, I'm getting my years blended together. Sorry.
I do it all the time.
But yeah, he did this great talk on node security. And so when you're talking about doing the back end and things like that, I thought it was really, I didn't even know that you knew Node until that, right? Because we had talked about like YUI back in the day and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to see, not only a friend, up there talking, but like a really awesome topic. So I mean, how do you keep up with this stuff? How do you find these talented developers to speak about these things and the topics that are going to be useful?
So the funny thing is, it's actually got easier as time's gone by because, when you run a conference like Fluent and it gets to a certain size, so, I can't remember the exact number, but, we had over 1,500 people there this year. When you get to a certain size, you kind of do get this nice halo effect and people kind of get, brought into it, like they've heard of the conference and they kind of come to us. So each year we have to actually kind of do less and less work to really bring people out of the woodwork, as it were. Obviously we like to always find new names when we're going through the proposals and reviewing and stuff. We don't want to just have the same people there year after year, but in terms of the proposals, we get really lucky. So this year, for example, for 2016, we had, I think it was like 490 something proposals. So like 500 proposals, and that has to cram down into like 70 like spaces or whatever. So the amount that we get is just crazy. So as long as we've got the coverage of the topics and we're happy with that, then we don't have to do too much searching. But in the early days, and I guess this will be relevant to anyone who wants to run a conference of their own, perhaps, that's watching, you do have to do a lot of work in year one, year two, just because you're not a known name, and you need to do lots of outreach. So like year one was pretty much just me and Brady were going around emailing people we knew were good speakers and people we knew within companies who knew potential speakers, and we would just be like, we're starting this conference, we want to find the best people doing X, Y, and Z. And we kind of took that approach. So we really had to do a ton of outreach. And then in year two, the focus was on improving the diversity. So by no means, Fluent's always been quite a diverse conference, lucky to say, kind of by default. And I think a lot of this comes down to that, we always have a diverse program committee and we always have a diverse conference team. But we really had to do some outreach to get the diversity in the speakers that we wanted in year two. But again, that seems to have lived on since then as well. So it actually becomes easier and easier. So in a way, you kind of get an unfair advantage as a big conference that's been around a few years in that you actually do less work. So launching a conference is really hard, but maintaining one, not quite so much.
And not just at Fluent, but with Cooper Press and everything. You have all these newsletters and you get all these great articles. One of the things I always wondered, and because I've done my own research on a lot of these things, is how do you figure out what is experimental and what is going to be, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what is going to be, probably something that people are going to start using soon?
It's hard to really put a finger on it. I mean, a lot of it does come down to your gut instinct. So one of the things that gives it away, obviously, is if a company does a massive push behind something, but it's not clearly a commercial product. So take something like Angular, for example, or React, things like that. When they came out, launched a ton of fanfare, but they weren't commercial plays from Google and Facebook respectively. They kind of kept them in their own teams, and they weren't really pushing them in a heavy commercial way, but they were still popular. And when you see that happen, you know that something good's usually going to happen. As opposed to when a company comes out and pushes something very commercially, it's a little bit more tricky. So I'd say Meteor is perhaps an example of that. Meteor has become popular, but sometimes it feels a little bit hard to work out where it is in the ecosystem, and it almost feels like a separate thing from everything else. So there do seem to be these commercial walls go up around things. So I think the lack of a commercial wall helps a lot, even if it is a big company kind of backing it with money. But beyond that, I mean, one of the things I like to do is just throw things up onto Twitter. So we've got a JavaScript Daily Twitter account that has, how many is it? About 170,000 subscribers or so, followers or so. I just put things up on that, and then you can see if you get tons of retweets, you can kind of work out what's happening. But in terms of knowing whether something is really experimental or is going to be for the long haul, you kind of don't really know. Certain places we've missed the mark. So Dart, for example, the language that Google put out to kind of almost replace JavaScript. They say that it wasn't meant to, but you can see some of the intentions on the back-end mailing lists. That one doesn't really seem to have gone where they thought it was going to go. And we had a Dart weekly newsletter that we ran for a year, but it just kind of fizzled out. But then other technologies kind of creep up slowly and do really well, like Go, for example. So sometimes you can't tell, and sometimes it's just down to actually making something successful. So there's plenty of examples of technologies where like they've initially not been received very strongly, but then over time they do just gradually build up and up. And the fact that they're getting lots of coverage and they're getting lots of tutorials and there's newsletters springing up and blogs and stuff just kind of cements their influence. Perhaps Ember might be an example of something like that. You don't hear everyone saying Ember, Ember, Ember all the time like they do with Angular and React, but it has a really solid ecosystem.
Well, they don't have Google and Facebook to back them up.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is you don't know. It's really just a case of you just kind of cover everything and then you kind of see what catches light and then double down on it.
Yeah, one of the things that I've done, and I know that you've had a lot more extensive experience with it, is I'll look for articles that are repeated over time. So like if people are talking about the same things, about the same technology over a course of, a few months, then it's like, okay, well, this is something we should probably take a look at. But,
yeah. I think one of the things you need to look out for, actually, that I've seen over the years is when people who are quite savvy with technology do these kind of gushing posts about, oh, I've just discovered X, and it just blow my mind. It's just like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever found, and I'm going to use it, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
When you see things like that, you pay attention. So Rob Connery, for example, has recently done this with RethinkDB. So that really kind of opened my eyes to that. I was familiar with it anyway, but just, the fact that he's so amazingly into it. A lot of people did the same with MongoDB sort of a few years ago. You've seen a resurgence of Postgres happening almost the same way. People are like, oh my God, you can use it instead of Mongo. You can put documents into it. You can do JSON with it. Seeing people excited about that really says a lot and really gets you excited for the technology yourself. And perhaps one of the earlier ones that I remember was Rails. When Rails came out, we saw exactly the same sort of thing. And, people were going out of their way to make videos about it and stuff. And back then, people didn't make developer videos back in 2004, 2005. But Rails was encouraging them to do so. So, again, we all know what happened with Rails, but it seemed to work. So, look for excitement is always a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, there was Railscast was probably the most well-known of those.
Mm.
And
exactly.
yeah, and like RethinkDB is a great example of what you're talking about, because I remember I've heard of this like over a year ago, and I was like, okay, whatever, because I'm more of a front end person, and I want to keep up and understand, okay, the high level, what are these technologies for the back end, but most of the stuff that I'm really passionate about is on the front end. But then now recently there's been a lot on RethinkDB, and there was a JavaScript Jabber episode recently with Rethink, and they had some really good technical questions that were, it was really interesting stuff. So yeah, that's it's kind of weird. Some of those things, you'll see something, some glimmer of it, and then it'll disappear, and then whoosh, a year later or something, you'll just see all this stuff about it.
No, absolutely. And and when you see companies perhaps try and engineer that, it doesn't always work out so well. So sometimes you see companies are trying to sort of buy advertising here and there, and they're trying to like do lots of blog posts on their technology, but there's this kind of extra magic spark that just is missing sometimes as to whether something will become popular or not. It can't always be manufactured, and I think that's what perhaps the gut instinct is. I can perhaps see when that happens and when it doesn't, just because I've kind of seen it from both sides of the table so many times. You just get a gut feel for it.
Yeah, and for developers too, I find that we focus a lot on what we're good at, right? But we don't really look at the holistic things of if you work. I have a lot of experience like in startups and product building and services. So there's a lot of integration points. So I need to integrate with not only backend developers, but UX. design stuff. I need to integrate with other technologies. Maybe a client is using .NET or things like that. So to research that, it's a lot. It's overwhelming. But, I do things like for me, audio is easier than, searching through for different articles and things. I have the blogs that I follow, but like .NET Rocks, that particular podcast, right? I listen to that, and they have episodes that I don't listen to, but I listen to it a lot because I'm not a .NET developer, but if I have to work with .NET developers, I want to know what they're working with and what the latest things are. And, that's surprising to some people because they're like, why waste your time? But to me, it helps a lot when I'm working with clients and I'm working with other teams.
Yeah, I mean, it takes active work, as we've just explained. It takes active work to really get your worldview out of a bubble sometimes. I've definitely noticed that. I mean, there's plenty of developers out there that, and through no fault of their own, kind of perhaps, they're heavily into the Unix or perhaps the Python, Ruby kind of, that sort of world. And they kind of think, the .NET world is just like a kind of inconsequential career developer type thing that's used in a few big enterprise places, but they don't know the full scale of it and some of the things that are happening there and some of the interesting technologies that are coming out of there. And even the same with like the Java world. The Java world is absolutely huge, and I don't think everyone really has a grasp on how huge it is and just how many developers and how much money there is in that world compared to other ecosystems. So I definitely have to actively work to really keep an eye on I don't even monitor what's going on in the Java world that closely, but I really try and keep it in my head all the time, like just how big it is, how important it is. So I don't just immediately think, oh, it's something Java, like that sucks because I don't like Java. Sometimes things come out of these worlds that is very, very important and kind of indicative of larger trends. And I feel kind of responsible to actually keep an eye on that stuff, even if it's not directly related to what my audiences are interested in. So I think that's actually probably part of the service that I offer with these newsletters is that there is someone out there who is kind of keeping watch in a way. It's a bit of a weird way to think about it, but I guess I'm increasingly looking at myself a bit like a researcher for like Gartner or Forrester or whatever, like as someone who just deliberately vacuums up just stuff from all over the place, not necessarily because I'm going to give it all straight back to you, but so that at least that I've kind of had a look at what's going on in the .NET world, what's happening with Oracle, what's going on in Java, what's going on in all these worlds, just so that if something big does come up, or is there some bigger trend, that I'm likely to feed it into my JavaScript work or my Ruby work or the other technologies I cover. It's going to come up and I'm going to have some context for it rather than just being completely blindsided by it. So I like to think that's a little bit more of what I provide. I'm kind of, your man on the outside, as it were, like, because I'm looking at everything so often.
Yeah, at a very high level, which is really good because then, let's say it comes up that you need to incorporate some of those ideas into something else, then you have that beginning context to do further research. A lot of people say, well, you're just going to dive in and learn everything, then you're not going to learn anything. But I totally agree with you on that, and you've done a fantastic job. I think I have subscriptions to like 5 of those newsletters. So we can get into the newsletters in a second, but I do want one more question on Fluent.
Yeah.
As far as like, it seems like a very exciting project. I do want to attend one day. But I've seen the videos. But it seems so exciting. What is your favorite part of working on Fluent?
It's changed over the years. I think my most favorite part at the moment is a thing we've got called the Community Lounge, which we began in 2014, but we really pushed heavily this year, and it's going to just get even bigger next year. It's kind of this area in the hallway. Now, when I say hallway, we're talking like 50 feet wide plus. Like these are big kind of convention places. So you can sort of cram a lot of people into a hallway. But what we've tried to do is kind of add a little bit more structure to the hallway track where we can. So for anyone who's not too familiar with conferences, the hallway track is this idea of an informal kind of meeting up with other attendees of the conference to kind of talk about what you're doing and see what other people are doing and stuff. But what we do is we have areas with seating and PowerPoints and all this stuff out in our hallway kind of areas. But then we also schedule meetups there. So this year, for example, we had a web performance meetup. We had Steve Souders came along, and while he wasn't directing it, he was there, and we could kind of engineer conversations and get people to ask questions, and he would answer them, and we sort of had this really nice meetup. So I really enjoyed bringing together some of those conversations in a more formulaic way. And the reason for that is that I think a lot of people that go to conferences, and I mean this is definitely true for me at least, are perhaps not completely introverted, but find it perhaps hard to just go up to someone totally random and dig into like what they're doing and what technology you're using and that type of thing. So if we can bring together people that are interested in certain topic areas and then bring in some of the speakers and some of the experts we know that are at the event, and kind of give people permission just to talk to each other in that context, it seems to really work. So I'm really keen on pushing that further, because I think those are the real special moments that are more memorable at conferences, rather than I saw this talk that I could just watch on YouTube or whatever. It's more that I got to meet Steve Souders, or I got to meet Scott Hanselman, or I got to speak to some random man or woman that kind of runs an engineering team in the middle of nowhere, but they're using the technology I use, and they gave me this great tip.
That personal connection is
yes.
Fantastic, for sure.
Yeah, we really want to push that, and that's something that a lot of community conferences have done, but it's less common at the more kind of, I hate to call us a commercial conference, because we're not really like a trade show as such. But the bigger, more enterprisey style events, it happens less there. So we really want to make that a big thing of what we do.
I think I would agree to that. I was part of that Google platform in 2014. I definitely enjoyed it. And one of the things I enjoyed about Fluent in general was just the interacting with the people, picking up their brain and asking few questions. And I think there are some different designated timings when you can meet to those people and ask your project specific questions to them. I think that was great. So overall, I think I think that was definitely my favorite part about Fluent too, just meeting with people and getting tips from them. And also in general, though, I think it was just like an instant upgrade for me on a lot of technologies, because as we just talked, it is web platform conference, is pretty vast. You might have experience in one field, but other fields you may or may not have a chance to explore. But in conference, probably in 30-40 minute sessions, you get pretty good feeling of the areas, and I can say you can level up the things pretty well when you attend these sessions. So I think that was my experience as an attendee. And definitely as a speaker, I had great memories as a speaker too. But the personal connections I made during the conference time, those were definitely most memorable things for me too.
Chet, did you have a lot of time to go see other people's presentations? Because I found when I speak at conferences, a lot of times you're just so rushed and you don't get to see too many.
Yeah, so definitely there was a lot of time. I think it is a multi-day conference. So even though I had my talk, I spent a lot of time in the speakers area as well as after conferences. There is, I think, good 10-15 minutes break, and you can definitely catch up. So yeah, I think that was not an issue, at least for Fluent for me. That worked well.
So would you agree with that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we actually did deliberately do was to help facilitate some of these interactions is in the first year, we had 40-minute talks with, I think it was like 5-minute breaks, possibly something like that. But then as of a couple of years ago, we moved to 30-minute talks with 15-minute breaks. So, that's it doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of the ratio, it's quite a big change. But the thing that we always say to speakers is that, you don't have to get to the end of your 30 minutes and just like, that's it, I'm out the room. It just gives you a wind down time. So people kind of have permission, like to leave because they're like, well, the talk's ended, I can leave if I need to. But then the speaker can also perhaps do a bit of Q&A, or perhaps, as I've always seen, people will go up to the front of the room, and I don't know if you experience this, but like people will, at the end of the talk, the most interested people will go up to the front and want to carry on the conversation and perhaps ask for more details. And so we wanted to provide that big buffer of time between talks so that you hanging out with your attendees isn't going to, really annoy the next speaker. But B, it just does add in that buffer so that people feel like they have permission to go and talk to a speaker rather than be like, oh, I've got to look at my watch, or I've got to get to the next talk. So we think that's really helped. And, we've had some complaints of, the talks are a bit short, the speaker doesn't get quite enough time to go into detail. But from my point of view is I would rather have those social interactions occurring. And I'd rather have people come and feel like, oh, I didn't quite get enough on this topic, I want to learn more about it, than be like sitting there bored and like playing on their laptops or whatever. So I do want people to come and just for like the physical aspect of the conference, which is, getting a gut feeling for things and, getting to meet people and stuff. I don't necessarily want them just to come and learn stuff. And I know this is obviously like O'Reilly and, kind of from the commercial side are big on, come to the conference and learn X, Y, and Z. But for me, it's more come to the conference, experience X, Y, and Z, and then you can kind of learn it later from, videos and books and, whatever. I just want you to come and, get the physical sense of what's going on. So, yes, I do pretty much agree with what, everything you said. It's something, we've tried to, it's been our intention to kind of design it that way.
Yeah, that 30-15 break, that sounds very interesting because I would imagine that a lot of the submissions you get are more high level than actually code dives. And I noticed though this year there, and this may have been done last year too, you have like workshops as well. And so yeah, I think that's where you would get the code piece. Am I correct in that? Because a half hour, it is hard to go dive into some code unless it's a snippet.
People do go into code. People do dive into it. Yeah, people move quickly, which is actually something we like. I definitely not against confusing the audience. So yeah, but obviously, in terms of going into a bigger project or doing something more extensive, we do have the workshops which are either 90-minute or 3 hours, so they get to dive in a lot more there. But we have had workshops every year. It's a normal part of O'Reilly conferences. They used to all be 3 hours, but now we've gone to 90 minutes as well. So they're almost like slightly longer talks to a certain extent. But then added on to that, we also have trainings as well. Now, I know this is probably getting confusing now because you have talks and you have workshops and you also have trainings. Just to explain what trainings are like what other conferences might call workshops. They're basically where you pay somewhat extra and you're in a much smaller room with a much smaller group of people doing like 2 days of training. So that's more your typical kind of corporate training type thing. And they'll have a really deep dive on something and lots of hand holding and stuff. Our workshops are then more like, longer talks that go into more depth. And then we have our normal talks, which are the 30-minute ones.
We talked a lot about Fluent, but, the Cooper Press, I'm sure it takes a lot of your time. So, I mean, can you tell us, about the newsletter, like how you do the newsletter? What is a typical day for you on the newsletters?
It changes a lot over time, especially as I play with the technology, and I'm always trying to make my work process more efficient, or perhaps I'm just more lazy each time, like as I said. So the process that I used when we had one newsletter is a lot different. So now we have like 10 or whatever. But pretty much what I do is I'm always keeping my eyes peeled for anything that's interesting or major news or whatever. And part of the reason I'm always doing that is because we have Twitter accounts. So, when you have a Twitter account, you can't just put, do it once a week, because then, we'll be massively out of date for things. Mm-hmm. So I'm always monitoring, always keeping an eye on what's going on, major news, places like Hacker News and Reddit and, the major blogs, and just, I follow so many people on Twitter that I monitor as well, that I'm always kind of finding stuff via them. So there's always stuff going into our queue. But then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which are our production days, I sit down, I look through the queue, I work out what's the most important. I tend to write summaries of the most important things, and then they kind of get dropped into each newsletter, and it's as simple as that. Often I'll have to try out, different libraries or technologies or things just to make sure, they're legit and everything. But yeah, it's really just a constant process for me. Just, there's kind of this always bringing stuff in, but then on the actual day, I perhaps spend about an hour, going through everything, refining it, picking what's going in and getting it in. And then, we do lots of testing as well and then sending it out. So I always make sure that every newsletter, has at least 2 people see it. Because we've got sponsors and, things like that, we don't want to sort of annoy anyone or offend anyone. It does occasionally happen, unfortunately, but we like to make sure everything's sort of spick and span, and then we send it out and do spam testing and stuff like that. So it's not the most complicated thing in the world. It's just a case of getting the discovery process right and then getting the curation and summary process right. And the rest of it is pretty much just housekeeping.
With all the subscribers that you have too, I would imagine that people are sending you stuff at this point.
Yeah.
Like initially probably it's a lot of, manual scraping and things like that. But do you find that it's a lot of noise, or what's the submission process like? How do people send stuff to you?
So we don't have an official process at all, which people often point out. They're like, "Oh, do you mind that I've sent you this email?" And we're like, "No, it's fine." It's because we don't have an official form that you submit through. So what people can do is, though, all of our newsletters come from personal accounts. So you can hit reply on any of the newsletters and it will come straight to me, or I think sometimes other people, but it will come through to someone, and then they can queue it up. So I often receive emails. It's not as many as you might think. It's probably I don't know, about 20 a week, something like that. So we get items come through that way, and they're not guaranteed to make it in, but we do often receive things that we wouldn't otherwise find for our other channels. So, we do encourage people to submit stuff. But we also have some sites as well. So I used to run a popular Ruby blog called Ruby Inside, which has since been abandoned. But I used to get so many submissions to that I created a community blog called Ruby Flow. That's still available at rubyflow.com. It's still very popular. We sort of get several posts a day to that, and people post their Ruby related stuff there. So we're always scanning through that every week just to sort of see if there's anything we've missed. We've got a JavaScript one that we're kind of playing with. It's not a big deal, but jslive.com is the same sort of thing. And we often look through there for stuff. So we kind of have these different ways that people can get onto our radar, but none of them's official as such. And if anyone ever does ask for kind of an official way, I just say, just send a tweet to @PSC. And that goes for anyone, listening to this as well. If you want to sort of just say hi, or you just want to put a link in front of my face, pretty much, just @PeterC, and I'm going to see it. So if I see it and it's interesting, it'll get queued up anyway, because that's just what I'm doing every day of the week.
That's pretty impressive, though, that you have 20 a week without even mentioning a process or anything. Now you're going to get 15. So
yeah,
that is pretty impressive, and it's doable, right? Because I maintain a few communities as well, and going through spam can be tedious, but the communities that I have such great people that take part of it, that they flag a lot of stuff that is definitely spam before I even see it. And
we don't really have that problem. We're lucky.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty lucky as well because of the community helping out. So I only really have 5 or 6 things a week on each community to go through, and usually I can tell right away from the first paragraph whether it's spam or not. So as far as the JavaScript weekly, the podcast, which I hope you bring back one day. I remember when I first started listening to podcasts, it was when I got my first iPhone, and it was the 5 when it had just come out.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, let me look up HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and see what's out there. So yours and JavaScript Jabber came up, and there was this guy I never heard of, Paul Lewis, who had a podcast on WebGL. And we all know Paul Lewis now because he works at Google, right? Yeah. And he does great performance stuff over there. He has his own shows and things like that. But this was a great podcast on WebGL.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is great. And it was like 3 episodes. And then I never heard it again. So it was like, I still kept subscribing to yours and his, and nothing came up. And I'm feeling that with some newer podcasts that I listen to too. So I try to make sure that I'm constantly putting out content weekly so that people know that they can depend on information from this podcast. But it's hard because you have a lot of it's a lot of work to do even one, and you have like 10 newsletters, and I'm really glad to hear you have help with these, because I'm imagining you yourself in the middle of the night going through all of this stuff. So I mean, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you know when it's time to stop, watching a project or stop working on a project in that case?
This might be a very cynical answer, but it pretty much all comes down to the business of it for me. And that's always been the case, actually. Like, a lot of people say, like it's a bad thing to do stuff, for like commercial gain and all this sort of thing. But I don't think it's mutually exclusive that you do something for commercial gain and that you're not passionate and interested in it. I think you can do both. So there's plenty of sports people out there who are great at like football or tennis or whatever, but like if there was never any winnings for it, then they wouldn't devote their life to it because it just wouldn't be any kind of sort of motivation beyond just enjoying doing the sport. So it's a bit like that for me. I kind of look at it a bit like perhaps a football player would, in that I really enjoy the world of programming, and I really enjoy the world of publishing, and I really enjoy doing all this stuff. And when I began doing it, I began it without any expectations of accumulating any sort of wealth whatsoever. But the fact is that to keep it going and to keep it, to keep yourself motivated and keep yourself doing it even when things are going wrong, having a commercial aspect there really, really, really helps. So we've had newsletters perhaps in the past where, an issue hasn't been sponsored or whatever, or, this is like really, really early on when we weren't focusing on sponsorships. So perhaps an issue wasn't sponsored and I'll be like, oh, I'm just tired this week, I'm not doing the issue. So I just skip the issue. But the fact is that when you end up getting sponsors and they book out, months in advance and so on, you've kind of got to do it. So you've got to really reorient how you think about it in a commercial way, because you've got to put the issue out or you don't get paid. And the fact is, it doesn't mean that I enjoy doing it any less. It just means that I now have this constant tempo that's being provided by the commercial aspect of it. And I think the same is true of podcasting as well. At least it would be for me. So, if like, let's say when we were doing the JavaScript show, let's say we were sort of booked out with sponsors or whatever 6 months, we would have just gone bam, 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 and just kept doing it for 6 months. Enjoyed doing it. The audience would have loved it. But we would have had this kind of noose around our neck, really, which is the, annoying the sponsors. I kind of have that same obligation to them with the newsletters, and that's why they're constant and they come out every single week. So, yeah, I mean, some people are going to turn around and go, oh, it's just like a big money-making exercise. It's not. But the fact of having an obligation that is commercial, and the fact that, I've got employees and, things like that I need to pay, really does keep things going. And I think everyone benefits from that. So, obviously I get to, make an income. Several other people get to make an income. You get to see, the content every single week. And the sponsors are happy as well. So I think it's a win-win-win kind of situation, really. But, unfortunately, some people don't see it that way. But that's how it works for me.
I mean, absolutely. You gotta make sure that you can provide for your family, and make some money. I do this like on my free time, and my workplace is a sponsor, so they allow me some time, not a lot, to work on this. But one of the struggles I've had throughout this is, because I'm putting out money, like I don't make money on it right now, so I love doing it, and that's why I keep doing it. I love the community. Like, I love open source and the web community in general. So I keep doing it because I want to learn more and I want to share all that. But I do want more for this podcast. I do want to do like, you know, transcriptions of all of these episodes. I want to have, you know, a decent website.
Yeah.
And you know, it sounds funny because I'm a web developer, right? But you don't have the time with, you know, with work and everything to do all of this stuff. I don't know how what your story is with sponsorship, but I mean, O'Reilly is a media sponsor with us, and I'm very thankful for that, and it's great. And we have a really good relationship. Deloitte Digital also, because that's where I work, but I don't get any particular money coming in. So one of the struggles I've had is finding those sponsors who would pay for some of this stuff to happen. And so, like, I've applied to several companies, and what happens is they don't respond. Most of them. Some of them respond no or whatever, but I'm shocked because this podcast has actually gone way better than I ever imagined. Like, I was like, if 10 people listen to this, I'm so happy, right? 10 people can benefit then. But we've gotten like 15,000 a month or whatever. So it's been great. And the people I've met through the podcast has been fantastic. And not just the guests, but all of the listeners too. Like, I met some listeners at different conferences and stuff like that. And that was amazing. And so like, I've found, though, if I send out to these large companies, like, I don't know if I should name names, but, you know, okay, large companies that are in, like, the web space, right?
Yeah.
They don't, you know, they typically don't respond. And some of the podcasts I've seen that are in technology, I've been shocked to see that they have, like, 100,000 downloads a month. And I'm like, what is going on there? Like... What was your struggle with that, with sponsorships, or your win, your success on that?
We never had a struggle, but that's mostly because I wasn't intending to do it that way. Like, the whole newsletter side of what I was doing was just like a side thing. It was just for fun, pretty much initially. It was running the blogs that I was more into, so like the Ruby Inside one I mentioned before. We had a handful of sponsors on there, which, you know, is obviously always helpful when you've already got relationships you can lean on. But we never intended to do, you know, stuff with the newsletters that was commercial. It was really just to promote our own stuff. I was running a Ruby training course, and, you know, I actually did kind of sell it out a few times just by mentioning it on the newsletter. But that was the goal. But just found that we couldn't produce enough, you know, of our own content. And so people were reaching out because, you know, their engineers at their company or whatever were saying, oh, this newsletter is really cool. You know, perhaps we should, you know, sponsor it in some way or whatever. So we had, you know, advertisers reaching out to us before we were really considering doing it.
You'll have to teach me this black magic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that really, really helps, and I found this with both the blogs and the newsletters, is that if you already have sponsors, it's easier to get more. But getting those first few is very, very difficult. And it's a bit like what I said with the conferences, getting the first speakers. You kind of have to fake it to make it in a way if you don't, you know, have those initial ones to lean on. It's a bit like, you know, how Reddit, when Reddit started, they sort of created like hundreds of fake accounts and had conversations between themselves to lure people in. You know, so even if you ran sponsorships for free, like, you know, you reached out to a company and said, oh, you know, we're kind of doing this podcast and, you know, we're doing really well and we've got all these subscribers, you know, we're trying to sort of launch our sponsorship side, but, you know, we don't want to sort of, you know, charge anyone for anything, you know, before we know exactly what it is we can deliver. You know, so would you be interested in, you know, sponsoring us, like, well, not sponsoring us, but you look like you're sponsoring us, but we're not going to charge you a dime. You know, for the first month or whatever, you know, would you be interested in that? And then actually kind of get a big name kind of, you know, foot under the door pretty much, that people recognize. Well, suddenly what happens is their competitors are like, hang on, we've seen XYZ company that, you know, we really hate or we're competing with, you know, sponsoring this. And it's funny how many internal engineers to companies will forward things to their marketing teams, I've discovered. So we've had it definitely where like just to pick a bunch of companies, just to mention them, because I can get away with mentioning these names. So companies like Hired.com, TopTal, Underdog, there's a whole bunch of these kind of recruitment service type companies. And they all seem to keep pretty close tabs on what the others are doing and where they're advertising. So sometimes you'll have one in a newsletter and like the other one will reach out and be like, oh, our engineers have seen this in this. Can we sponsor this other one? And you see things like that happen a lot. So the fact is, having any sponsors kind of, and a variety of sponsors ready to roll and going, even if you're not making a buck from them, will help you bring other people out of the woodwork. So, that's always my advice to anyone who's starting a conference or a podcast or a blog or whatever, is just get sponsors in there, even if you're doing it as a swap for something or for free or just really, really cheap. Just get something in there, and then, more people will follow off the back of that if you're doing the right stuff.
Well, one of the great things about the relationship we have with O'Reilly is, all of our listeners get discounts on O'Reilly stuff. So that's awesome too.
This is a good segue.
Yeah. So we get like, we all of you listeners out there, you're going to get, if you want to get Fluent tickets, if you want to go to the conference in San Francisco, we'll have 20% off and a specific code. I don't have it in front of me, but I will have it on the show notes that you can use, or maybe I'll do a recording after this to add this to the podcast. But basically, you'll get 20% off. You also get 40% off of most of the printed materials as well. So
50% off of eBooks I'm reading.
40 to 50, yeah. So
yeah.
Definitely take advantage of that. I'm trying to get more sponsors like this as well, because O'Reilly's been great. They have very, very specific things that they lay out that we expect this from you, and we will provide this for you. And that's a really awesome relationship, I think.
That is part of the secret to sponsorship relationships. Like, sometimes it really takes, I find, looking at what other people are doing who are successful with something, and like, even if you don't understand their methodology, kind of copying it a bit. So one of the things that we've done is, we saw that people were running blogs and running emails and stuff and were doing well with advertising. There was a PDF media kits. So we've got a PDF media kit. And once we did it, like, actually, we got way more business off the back of that than even just like some of the other things we did. So the fact is, people are used to doing certain things, and over time, you can find out why those things work. So one of the things that we discovered about PDF media kits is that marketing people in sort of big companies, what apparently they will always do is they will always print out PDFs and then share them in internal meetings with the marketing directors and things like that. And then that's how they make their decisions of where to sponsor. Whereas with a web page, that's harder to do. It's less natural to print out a web page, like, because it never comes out right. It always looks horrible. Whereas if you've got a well-designed PDF, they see that and they're like, the psychological hit of like, oh, that's well-designed, that's nice, there's the prices, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, go with them. So we've discovered, like, over time, that why certain things work. So I guess I've just given another tip away, actually. Like, just perhaps copying what other people do, even if you don't know why, and then find out the reason why it works later on, is something we've done a lot. And that's one thing that we learned from O'Reilly as well, is that, they do things in a certain way sometimes. You don't understand why, but then perhaps when you dig into it, or you find out what the customer thinks, or you just try it for yourself, you kind of find out why, and why certain things are done in a certain way.
Awesome. You talked a little bit about earlier, I know we're pushing up against time. I think we got like less than 10 minutes. But earlier you talked about meetups and when we were talking about Fluent.
Yeah.
So do you find that meetups and user groups are a good way to catch up on what's happening?
I think so, because I've not been to a huge amount of user groups, but the ones where I have, you always do get different perspectives on things. It's funny what people will say in real life that they don't say kind of on Twitter or whatever. I think perhaps there's actually a bit more groupthink online than there is in real life. You can go to a user group and say, oh, I've been using MongoDB, it's awesome. And someone will pipe up and say, oh, no, MongoDB sucks, and blah, 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 blah. You'll get these different varieties of opinion whereas online, it's harder to disagree civilly, I seem to have noticed. Whereas in real life, you kind of have these arguments without it actually descending into an all-out kind of troll fight or something. And that's one of the things I like about user groups is that there's a lot more debate seems to go on there that's healthy compared to online environments. So I've always found them useful from that point of view, in that it's a great place to go and have a debate and pick up some new opinions and get new views on the world. And that also goes for bigger conferences, but user groups in particular seem to be really good for round the table debates.
Yeah, one of the things too, I used to make it a point when I first moved to Virginia from New York to go to these meetups to see what's happening locally, since I didn't know the tech community in the area. And I found that a lot of these, I was really shocked that New York is not the center of all technology.
Yeah, I mean,
so like
what we were saying about Java and .NET and everything, though, it's funny, you do see your own view of the world.
yeah, and in Virginia, actually, where I am in Reston, there's a lot of incredible developers and a lot of great community work, a lot of open source people. I was really shocked at I found out that I haven't met him, but JSConf, what's his name?
Chris Williams.
He lives here.
Yeah.
In Reston, and all of these companies are in Reston and in Northern Virginia, like Microsoft, like VMware, all of these giant, There's a huge Oracle office here. There's a Google office here. DC has plenty. I couldn't believe what I didn't know about the community, and that's one of the great things about those meetups. I met a lot of interesting people there, and some of them are better than others, but it doesn't matter, because if you go to a bad one, even you're gonna talk with really, a bad one I say is like you don't really care for the presentation because, like you said, you have your own viewpoint of certain things, but you get those discussions and you get those things after and before, and you get usually free pizza and free beer or something.
Exactly, can't argue with that.
Yeah, so I found it really useful, but having young children, it's hard to go out at night now, so I'm looking for more of them that are during the day. Breakfast time, lunchtime, that I can go out on it for an hour and see.
Yeah, it seems like business people have really nailed that one better than developers have. The development ones do all seem to be evening type things and do tend to orient around pizza and often sometimes alcohol. Whereas I've noticed a lot of business people tend to have these kind of marketing, breakfasts and things. Certainly true the area where I live. It seems to be more just general business people. But again, you can get a lot out of meetups like that as well. So, I'm definitely a proponent of them, even if I don't attend very many myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you want listeners to do to help with the newsletters, to to follow you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle, and how can people find you and talk to you about all this stuff?
So hitting me on Twitter is always the best way. So that's Peter C, literally PETERC, to get in touch. It's the thing that I'm monitoring perhaps the most often. Doesn't get some kind of hidden away like my email sometimes does when I get busy. I pretty much respond instantly on there. But yeah, if people are interested in JavaScript and HTML5 and things like that, if you're not already subscribed, then we pretty much have JavaScript Weekly, HTML5 Weekly, Ruby Weekly. Just kind of take a topic and put weekly on the end. Even if you don't find us, you're going to find someone interesting. Like Python Weekly isn't ours, but some people think it is, but it's not. But it's run by a really cool guy. So, I've not come across many weekly newsletters that are really horrible yet in the tech space. So just go out and support all of them, even if they're not ours, because a lot of people are doing some great work out there and know their stuff. We have lesser known ones as well, like DB Weekly, just kind of covers database technology in general. We're trying to do some more of these big picture ones. So, people following those is always a benefit. But if you go to javascriptweekly.com and you go to the bottom, you can actually see a list of all of the different newsletters we've got. So that will help. But other than that, obviously coming to conferences like FluentConf and OSCon and stuff is obviously awesome because, not just because we have more people there, but we have more viewpoints. Any viewpoints that you can bring will be very beneficial. And of course, as Chetan knows, we sort of like to meet up with everyone who turns up and take cool pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
We always like to have a good time. And I believe we've got some sort of discount codes and things that you're going to be sharing either in the show notes or in a sort of a separate bit on this recording. So come along to the events, say hi. Don't be scared or anything. Just come along. Make a nuisance of yourself. It's what I like to go and do. I can't really think of a lot more to say. Just subscribe to all the things and visit all the events. It's a good time.
Yeah, and I think I could totally agree to it. The greatest resource for me is the newsletters, and I like the way it is consistent. It's coming every week with quality links. That is, even I would pay for it if you if you ask for it. It's that valuable for me. And same with your podcast, Eric. So is that consistency I think is very key for me to rely on your resources, and you both are doing great service to community. Thank you for that.
That's cool. Yeah, no, thanks. It's one thing we hear quite a lot, actually. People say, we wouldn't mind paying for it or whatever. But my viewpoint on that is unless we have a value add, we wouldn't do it. And the reason is that I'd much rather be able to talk to 100,000 people and not make any subscription money than talk to perhaps 10,000 or 1,000. Reaching the majority of the community is very important for us. Just because it perhaps helps us sometimes shape what becomes popular sometimes, which can be useful if we've got strong opinions. But just subscribing is more than support enough at this point. And I think we're going to be getting into doing podcasting as come up a few times here, but we're actually looking at doing our own events as well over time. So don't tell O'Reilly. We're looking at doing our own events.
Tell them what?
Well, exactly. But they'll probably be in a very, very different flavour to what O'Reilly does. And not because what O'Reilly does is bad, but just because we've kind of got some different things, experiments we'd like to try. So keep an eye out for those and, come along to our things. So that'd be very cool.
Variety is the spice of life, they say, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you need a bit of everything. Community conferences, commercial conferences, free stuff. We like to provide a mixture.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your services for sure, and I'm looking forward to new podcasts and new things that you guys are doing. And I'll have that information about Fluent in the show notes, and I'll tweet it out also. And thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been cool.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you. Thank you.
Call for proposals is done and registration is open. And O'Reilly Fluent Conf is back in just a few months. Fluent, the web platform conference, will be held in San Francisco, California on March 7th through 10th, 2016. So get practical training in JavaScript, HTML5, CSS, and the latest web development technologies and frameworks. The Web Platform Podcast listeners receive a 20% discount when registering for the conference. So make sure you use the promotional code PCWPP20 to receive your discount. You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at @thewebplatform or on Google Plus and YouTube at +thewebplatform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.